Hello again and happy and blessed Sunday from Metro Manila, the Philippines, Southeastern Asia. Sorry to bother you at this hour, but I just want to read excerpts from an opinion article that was written, or even a newspaper or magazine article that was written for the Charlotte Observer in early November 2020 concerning the splits that have happened in the extended family of Reverend Franklin Graham, who still continues to support the defeated US President Donald Trump, in whose honor there is a rally called Let the Church Roar, where supposedly Christians are praying that the walls will come tumbling down, the walls of Jericho will fall, as if people were not dying all around them uh, of COVID and other diseases, as if they should not first and foremost pray God to send a true revival, Christian revival, to the United States, because that's the only cure and of course to the rest of the world as well, because only a truly deep and cross-cutting Christian revival, which results in the salvation of many people, lasting salvation and wholehearted salvation of many people, can save the United States and the rest of the world from God's righteous judgments in the near future, or at least postpone those righteous judgments. Of course, they can't be postponed indefinitely. So regardless of what happens next Monday on December the 14th, 2020, in the US presidential elections, when the 538 presidential electors will meet, in all likelihood, at least 270 of them, probably more, will vote for President-elect Joe Biden, especially now that all of the legal challenges put forward by the defeated president, Donald Trump, and his legal team have been defeated. The latest defeat came on Friday, December the 11th, 2020, when correctly the United States Supreme Court dismissed a lawsuit put forward by Texas and seconded by Trump and by 17 other states' attorneys general or justice ministers, claiming that supposedly the presidential election results in Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, and Georgia had to be invalidated, and new slates of electors had to be chosen by those four states. State legislatures, but of course the illogicality came first of all in the sense that they did not have any provable evidence that there was so widespread vote fraud or there were so widespread voting irregularities, then supposedly this would have validated this call for new slates of electors. And of course, secondly, they did not offer any proof to interfere with the other states, for other states' presidential election processes. And of course, they did not offer any convincing proof as to why exactly those four states, all of which were narrowly called, but correctly called, accurately called for former Vice President, and now the US President-elect Joe Biden, why exactly those four states and not any of the 46 others had such deep cases of vote fraud or election irregularities that only their vote totals, which by the way included many votes for Donald Trump, should be invalidated. But let's now go blind. Or Donald Trump is not a born-again Christian. With an almost 100% certainty, I can declare this. I have observed him since he began his first presidential campaign 5.5 years ago. At no point have I become convinced that he has truly given his life to Jesus Christ. And actually a growing number of Christians in the United States and elsewhere have concluded that he's not a true Christian, including such profoundly conservative evangelicals as businessman Fred Rand, who almost 1 year ago, in January 2020, wrote an opinion editorial article to a newspaper in southern United States where he concluded that Donald Trump fit the biblical definition of a fool. For Donald Trump's salvation, indeed for a true Christian revival in the United States, he strongly considered giving up his longtime membership in the US Republican Party. He also supported the then ongoing effort to impeach and remove Trump from office, which failed. And almost exactly 1 year ago, Mark Galli, who was then the outgoing editor-in-chief of Christianity Today, which is widely and internationally respected interdenominational and evangelical magazine, in a biblically and philosophically grounded editorial called for the removal of Donald Trump from office, while continuing to assure the readers that he and the other members of the editorial staff of Christianity Today would keep praying for Trump, above all for Trump's salvation. But let's go to this article, which was published by the Charlotte Observer, and written by Tom Fiedler, ABL Watchdog, on November the 12th, 2020. Reverend Franklin Graham, unfortunately, either did not carefully read and prayerfully and reflectively enough read Mark Galli's editorial, or then he had some kind of a political agenda, or a mixture of Christian and political agenda, and he claimed that the editorial was designed to discredit President Trump. No, it wasn't. It was designed to show how it is possible to be a solidly Jesus-loving and wholeheartedly Bible-believing and Bible-obeying Christian, and to oppose President Donald Trump for his obviously sinful behavior. Well, Reverend Graham claimed that his world-famous father, Billy Graham, who passed away at the age of 99 in February 2018, knew Trump and voted for Trump in the November 2016 US presidential elections because, he claimed that the elder Graham believed that Trump was the man for this hour in the history for our nation. That was too much for another Billy Graham descendant, his grandson Aram Chivijian. In a response to his uncle's post, Chivijian wrote with withering sarcasm, "I'll never forget that day in 2016 when my grandfather Billy Graham shrugged off the symptoms of Parkinson's and hydrocephalus." I mean, he was severely disabled already at that time, got up out of bed for the first time in a year, drove down to the polling station and cast his vote. What a glorious memory. A reader of this Twitter exchange weighed in with a question to Franklin, "Is your nephew calling you a liar?" Indeed, he was. For those who hadn't followed the insular world of evangelical Christianity, this exchange blew into full view a rip in the Graham extended family's fabric that mirrors a larger split within the entire evangelical community, or large sections of it, not only in the United States, but in tens of other countries of the world. Most of them, however, post-Christian countries. In the third world, I don't honestly believe that there are so many deeply committed, fanatical, almost idolatrous Trumpists among the truly born-again Christians as there seem to be in the post-Christian Western and rapidly secularizing Western world. A split likely to be accelerated by Trump's defeat for re-election. Chivijian and his more outspoken sister Jerushah Duford, whose mother Gigi Graham Chivijian is Billy Graham's oldest daughter and oldest child, have emerged as the family's most visible critics of their uncle and of Trump. Author Stephen Prothero, a professor of religious studies at Boston University, Massachusetts, described the grandchildren as outliers in their own family and in the wider white evangelical community in their willingness to accuse their Uncle Franklin of abandoning Billy Graham's example of nonpartisanship by tying his ministry so tightly to Trump. No wonder he doesn't draw many crowds anymore. No wonder he was disinvited to a so-called festival, mass evangelistic crusade in Britain. Well, partly it was because of his outspoken denunciation of same-sex marriage, but also because of his apparently unwavering and spiritually compromised support for Donald Trump. Because, I mean, if he held a Christian meeting of any kind, and then a person came forward claiming to be burdened with his or her sins and asking for prayer so that Jesus would save him or her. Of course, Reverend Graham would be happy to pray for this person. But if this person then after the prayer said that, can I go on behaving much like before? Can I talk nastily if I feel like it? Can I tell lies and tall tales, exaggerate my accomplishments, belittle my mistakes, or even deny them, or invent my accomplishments? Can I call individuals whom I don't like with nasty names and invade snide nicknames for them? Can I claim that I've done more to defend the Christian faith and values than any other person in my family for decades? Then Graham would say, well, it seems that you don't really want to give your life to Jesus Christ. Then this person would say, well, good Reverend Graham, isn't that what your friend, presidential friend Donald Trump is doing? Why do you call him president who has done more than any other president since the 1950s to defend the Christian faith and values in the United States? I would really like to see or hear what Franklin Graham would say in response. So Franklin Graham seems to be too proud to admit that he has been fooled. He has been duped by Donald Trump during the last several years, or some or several years. At least the Jewish American minister of the gospel, Dr. Michael Brown, has written a book entitled Donald Trump is Not My Savior, but even he, in my opinion, has to some extent compromised his otherwise fine ministry to reach fellow Jews for Jesus by claiming that Donald Trump has done so much good for the true Christians that despite his sinful behavior, we should keep supporting him and so forth. Thank God, not all agree in either the evangelical community represented by Reverend Graham or the charismatic community represented by Dr. Brown. But Porfirio continued in an interview for this article, they signal what could be growing disquiet about the hijacking of what was once a clearly Christian and evangelistic purpose for what is raw Republican politics, or saying that vote for the Republicans because they are the lesser of the two evils. Satan dominates the Democratic Party. At least there are many more godly people in the Republican Party. Well, the fact is that most members and supporters of also the Republican Party are unregenerated. There are many nominal Christians there, including a lamentably high number of those who claim to be born-again Christians are probably not either born again or at least are not following Jesus wholeheartedly and sincerely now. And rather than denounce Donald Trump's failure to do anything in the last several weeks to halt or at least reduce the number of new cases of COVID, and rather vent his anger at the election results and raise a lot of money, at least to the tune of over 200 million US dollars, to finance his upcoming court battles, expected court battles, and his possible real campaign to become the United States' second president to serve non-consecutive single terms, then in 2024-2025. Rather than denouncing this, which shows where Donald Trump's priorities are, feeding his big ego, pleasing his fanatical core of supporters, and raising money. They are trying to pray for some supernatural miracle to overturn the election results through some earthquakes or whatever. That will not happen. God will not allow it to happen, and those Christians will be humbled to stick to preaching and living out the gospel. Suddenly, in the wake of Trump's re-election defeat, it appears possible, perhaps probable, that this disquiet will force a reckoning within the evangelical leadership, and not only that, within the charismatic and the Pentecostal leadership, and not only in the United States, but in all other countries that have had a significant number of Trumpists claiming to be born-again Christians. It comes at a time when evangelicalism is at an existential inflection point, weakened by declining membership and threatened by a younger generation that is indifferent, if not hostile to it, according to numerous surveys and the anti-Trump protests of high-profile dissidents. The Chivigia and Graham grandchildren are emblematic of those who insist this reckoning is necessary to save the faith they trace back to Billy Graham's teachings. Jerushah, Aram, and their 5 siblings grew up in South Florida with summer vacations near their grandfather's home in Montreat, east of Asheville, North Carolina. In the winter, the evangelist and his wife Ruth passed away already in 2007, often flipped that routine, visiting for extended periods in Delray Beach and spending idle time with the Chivigian grandchildren. Jerushah and Aram now live in Greenville, South Carolina, where he is the technology analyst in an advertising agency owned by Jerushah's husband, Kyle Duford. She balances speaking and writing engagements with pursuing a master's degree in clinical mental health while raising the couple's 6 children with Kyle. Both grandchildren admit to struggling with the new demands placed on them because of their criticism of fellow evangelicals. If I had known this would happen, I may have kept quiet. Or he should have said, I might have kept quiet, Aram said of the media attention. However, they agreed to be interviewed by ABL Watchdog a few days before the election to voice their belief that their uncle and other evangelical leaders were tarring with shame the faith that Billy Graham espoused in his decades-long public preaching. Jerushah was quoted as saying, "My grandfather's goal was to introduce people to the saving love and grace of Jesus, and he stayed out of politics for the most part because he knew he would alienate an audience if he was involved." Then adding a reference to her famous uncle. "He is too polarizing of a personality to be introducing people to Jesus. People outside the church are not going to listen to Franklin, or at least not even nearly as much as they listened to Billy Graham, who made a point of trying to behave politely even when he disagreed, and he almost always avoided open partisan involvement, and the little partisan involvement that he engaged in he regretted deeply in his old age, first in his autobiography Just As I Am, published by Zondervan in 1997, and then in an interview, I think in 2010 or 2011. Her brother, 2 years older, said that his uncle Franklin's public claim about Billy Graham voting for Trump was such blatant baloney that he couldn't resist responding with a sarcastic tweet. Chivigian said that he now regards his uncle and Trump as 2 peas in a pod. Jerushah's split from her uncle's positions burst into public view on August the 25th, 2020, coincidentally the opening day of the Republican National Convention, in a column she wrote for USA Today, which is one of the most widely circulated American daily newspapers, under the headline, "I'm Billy Graham's granddaughter, evangelical support of Donald Trump spits on his legacy." She wrote, for example, "The entire world has watched the term evangelical become synonymous with hypocrisy and disingenuousness." Well, in one example, her famous uncle, much more famous uncle than Ned Graham, the youngest of Billy Graham's 5 children, by the way. Anyway, Franklin Graham declared in a CNN interview, a televised interview of the cable news network, where Don Lemon, one of the key television journalists of that channel, interviewed him by video link. Franklin Graham claimed, for example, that Donald Trump was a changed man, and that all of us are sinners. Well, he was right in that claim, and that he hoped that during the rest of Donald Trump's um, first presidential term, he would become a more moral person. And incredibly, in January 2019, 2 years into Trump's presidency, the good Reverend Graham claimed in an interview that he could not name a single lie that Donald Trump had told. So if he was truthful in that claim, then he had to simply uh, refuse to read, listen to, or watch any factual reports, any fact checks of Donald Trump's numerous lies. At some point during Donald Trump's first presidential campaign in early 2016, I think two American Christian men wrote a column which quoted a source, an online source, claiming that Donald Trump had, until that point during his presidential campaign, lied 76% of the time. In other words, every 3 out of 4 statements, uh, according to that count, made by Donald Trump would be more or less false. And then later, maybe in the same interview in January 2019, the good Reverend Graham claimed that Donald Trump, instead of systematically and deliberately lying, had misspoken. In other words, accidentally said things that were not true. I simply cannot agree with Reverend Graham. Either he himself might not be telling the or might not have been telling the full truth. I hope and pray that that is not true. Or then he was simply being gullible and oblivious. And unfortunately, he's given the impression to many non-Christians, similar to one of my former Canadian history teachers. I can still remember during a high school history lesson, which he gave either in 1988 or 1990. He said cynically, he was cynical even in general about religions, especially about Christianity. Once you have God on your side, you can do whatever you want. And unfortunately, that's the impression that many non-Christians observing Trump's fanatical, more or less fanatical and spiritually compromised Christian supporters are getting. That as long as you support the pro-life position on abortion, as long as you support the traditional marriage between one man and one woman, never mind the fact that he is already living with his third wife and is a well-known and notorious womanizer, as long as you defund pro-choice organizations, as long as you speak at a pro-life rally, as long as you speak at the national prayer breakfasts, as long as you sometimes publish these and utter these pious statements like, we need more of the Spirit of Christ. He said this looking so grim-faced and serious at Christmas 2019. So as long as you and you endorse a number of born-again Christians of the gospel and candidates for public office, it doesn't matter up to a point how you behave towards those of your fellow human beings who disagree with you. So already the fact that he slanders them and has made fun of at least two of his critics' height, as if the physical height was proportional to a person's true value, which of course is not true. And like the fact that he tends to respond even to a polite and constructive criticism which tells him how he should correct his mistakes with insults and denials. And already the fact that, according to the Washington Post's count, during his single and hopefully only presidential term, he has made over 20,000 false or misleading statements. Over 20,000. In other words, an average of over 5,000 false or misleading statements per year. I mean, true Christians should be concerned about the truth, right? And especially those who are more or less full-time ministers of the gospel. Amazing. Her visibility as a spokesperson for anti-Trump evangelicals continued to grow during the run-up to the election when she co-founded a political action committee called Pro-Life Evangelicals for Biden and joined an advisory board for the Lincoln Project, which created a multi-million advertising campaign urging Republicans to oppose Trump's re-election. She pulled out her cell phone and read one text message: "Jerushah, I am sitting here crying after reading this and several other articles about you. I felt so alone in my feelings and questions about the church's support of Donald Trump. Everyone I have always looked up to and admired in my life and my Christian faith has shocked me and hurt me by their support of him. Thank you so much." To be sure, Franklin Graham has retained the public respect of other family members, which includes his 3 older sisters, a younger brother, and many of Billy and Ruth Graham's grandchildren, and from many within the evangelical community. The mantle he inherited from his father includes the proselytizing or evangelizing Billy Graham Evangelical or Evangelistic Association and Samaritan's Purse, a Christian charitable organization that he took over in 1979 with his father's support. In 2019, according to its Internal Revenue Service Form 990, Samaritan's Purse paid him a total compensation of $722,403 US. The Billy Graham Evangelical Association or Evangelistic Association changed its IRS classification in 2015 and no longer has to report executive compensation, but Franklin Graham paid himself $258,677 from it the last year before that change. His influence extends to social media, where he has nearly 2 million followers on Twitter and 7 million on Facebook. He tweeted in the days following the November 3rd, 2020 US presidential election, when the outcome was uncertain, "It's not over, we need to continue to pray for Trump." And in another tweet just hours later, "Many fear that some are trying to steal the election, so join me in praying that the enemies of God will be quieted." Although the effort, while short of saving Trump from defeat, white evangelical Christians provided one of Trump's strongest pillars. So exit polls showed that nearly 8 in 10 voted for the incumbent, about the same percentage as in 2016. And throughout his presidency, numerous surveys found that about 70% of white evangelical Christians approved of his job performance. However, analyst Robert P. Jones, director of the Public Religion Research Institute, which focuses on American attitudes toward religion, called a religious sea change threatening evangelicals. Jones found that in the past decade, so in the 2010s, the number of white evangelicals dropped from 21% of the US population to 15%, a greater decline than any other religious bloc. But that is only part of the story, Jones wrote in a column for NBC News. Turbocharging these trends is the exodus of young people from white Christian churches and into the ranks of the nones, in other words, those who claim no religious or Christian affiliation, the growing number of Americans who, yes, claim no religious affiliation, and this is a trend throughout, sadly, most of the Western countries. Gladly, it's a different story in most Latin American, African, and Asian countries, and I think in several of the non-Western Oceanian countries. Glory to God. A survey of young millennial voters by the conservative American Enterprise Institute found that 9% of them aren't interested in affiliating with any religious faith, and 59% believe that people who practice a religious faith are less tolerant. Boz Chivijian, an older brother of Aram and Jerushah, tweeted after hearing that in 2017, just weeks after Trump's inauguration, Franklin Graham had arranged for the Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, which he heads, to host a lavish banquet at the Trump International Hotel in Washington, D.C. at the cost of nearly $400,000. And the expense was noted as income in Trump's tax returns uncovered by the New York Times in September, I think, 2020. So Boz Chivijian tweeted, "Wow, almost $400,000 paid to the Trump Hotel, and most of that money likely coming from hard-working donors to Billy Graham Evangelistic Association, who give primarily because of their love for my great-grandfather, and who probably couldn't afford to stay even one night in a Trump hotel." I'm reminded of a column written uh, in the last week of September 2020, quoting the bitter and admittedly non-objective, but still, I think, partly and selectively reliable memoirs of one of one of Trump's former attorneys, Michael Cohen, who was released from prison after having pled guilty or pleaded guilty to lying to Congress under oath. He was released because of the ongoing pandemic, in which he claimed that Trump, while publicly claiming to support the Christians, in private many times had mocked them and had imitated Christian pastors, including the so-called faith healer Benny Hinn, who is of Israeli Arab origin, and privately, allegedly describing Creflo Dollar, a notorious African-American prosperity gospel pastor, that Creflo Dollar was full of the solid human waste. And then reportedly, Trump had once said, "I let them stay in my hotels, I associate with them, I played the game." Playback time, apparently. The Billy Graham Evangelistic Association later defended the expense and the location staying, saying that it was necessary because it was the only venue able to handle a banquet of that size on that date. But we may wonder what was the spiritual impact, if any positive spiritual impact came out of that event. In 2019, Franklin Graham, that is, organized a national series of revival-style rallies called the Discover America Tour. Although these were ostensibly non-partisan, each rally was heavy with praise for Trump and criticism for Democrats. In September, he co-organized a prayer march that drew thousands to the National Mall, and though he claimed this too was non-partisan, he urged the crowd to just pray that God will watch over and protect Trump, who he said had fulfilled all his promises to evangelicals. Later that day, he was a prominent guest, in September 2020, at the White House gathering announcing Amy Coney Barrett's nomination to the Supreme Court, an occasion that became a COVID-19 super spreader. Barrett was confirmed easily, although by no means handily, on an almost straight party line vote in late October 2020. This devotion to Trump has crossed the line for some prominent religious leaders, like the retired Reformed Baptist Reverend and writer John Piper. And he's one of the United States' most respected Protestant theologians and chancellor of the Bethlehem College and Seminary. So he angered Franklin Graham on the eve of the presidential election by writing that he failed to understand why many Christians could support a leader guilty of such sins as unrepentant sexual immorality, boastfulness, vulgarity, factiousness, and the like. Piper warned, and I'm afraid that he was correct, that the evangelical community is paying dearly for that support. Duford was forthright. "What I would respect," she said, "is if he," meaning her more famous uncle, Franklin Graham, would come out and say, "I know that Trump is a liar, he's a cheater, he's narcissistic, and he's rude, and he disrespects women, and I hate all that. But he puts forward policies that I agree with, and those policies are going to be in place long after he's gone, and therefore I will vote for him." But she continued, Franklin Graham cannot make such a statement because Trump doesn't accept that. You have to give him blind, complete loyalty. I would say at least you have to pretend that you are blindly and completely loyal to him, or he shuts you out. And evangelical leaders still want his ear, in other words, want to be listened to, at least nominally respectfully by him, so they stay quiet. That's very sad if it's true. Um, Averman and Jerushah concede that their criticisms make them outliers in both the extended Graham family and among many evangelicals. Their mother, Gigi, staunchly supported both Trump and Franklin. His daughter, Cissy Graham Lynch, was among the speakers at the Republican National Convention in the last week of August 2020, heaping praise on the president and vilifying the Democratic candidates, claiming that the Biden-Harris vision for the United States leaves no room for people of faith. She didn't respond to a request to comment for this article. But Jerushah said she has private support from other cousins who have thanked her for speaking out while they feel they cannot. Said she, I have spoken out as much as I have because I feel that some of these evangelical leaders are tarring Christianity with shame. People who don't know Jesus are not being introduced by the leadership to the Jesus I know. Prothero, Boston University's professor of religious studies, commented, I can only hope, for their sake and the sake of the country, that these outlier voices represent a groundswell rather than some last gasp, and that Franklin and his enablers in his family and in the wider white evangelical world will be called in some way to account. Once again, may God have mercy on all the people involved. God bless and keep all of you.